There used to be a place downtown where traveling players laid their heads. Theatrical digs with worn out beds and stories hanging on the walls around. The landlady knew every name of vaudevillains passing through. She'd cook them breakfast strong and true before they catch the morning train. Where did they go, those boarding houses where performers found their home? Now the stages feel so lonesome and the artists roam alone. Professional days for entertainers have vanished like the shows. Tell me, do we want them back, or let sleeping history those? Musicians shared their cigarettes in parlors thick with piano smoke. They'd swap their songs and inside jokes about the towns they'd not forget. The magician in room 3 would practice tricks until dawn, while dancers stretched out on the lawn, dreaming of celebrity. Where did they go, those boarding houses where performers found their home? Now the stages feel so lonesome and the artists roam alone. Professional days for entertainers have vanished like the shows. Tell me, do we want them back, or let sleeping history those? Now it's chain hotels and rental cars, GPS instead of local lore. No more gathered round the parlor, sharing dreams of Broadway stars. Progress swept them all away like confetti after shows. But something vital in us knows we lost more than yesterday. Where did they go, those boarding houses where performers found their tribe? Now we're scattered and divided by this digital divide. Professional days for entertainers, ghosts of stages long since closed. Do we want to bring them back, or let sleeping history those? The landlady's gone, the piano sold, but the music echoes still in the hearts of those who know what we've lost upon this hill.
Welcome to the showcase. Today we've got a great, exceptional showcase with a man from my hometown who is highly rated all over the world, Mr. Craig Leach. Hello, Craig.
Hi, Sean. Afternoon.
It is, yeah. I must tell the viewers we're based in Thailand, so it's probably a different town from what you expect. But we're both from Hull. We're Hull lads. And today's program is all about staying in pro digs. You ask yourself, pro digs, what are those? It's short for professional digs, which was a big part of life for entertainers, especially in the United Kingdom, from the 90s, believe it or not, to the 1980s. And this is where me and Craig fit in, old buds, particularly those working in variety circuits, seaside resorts, pantos, Clubland, and things like that. Here's what it was like. I'm going to ask Craig his opinion before we move on to what Prodigs was really about. So, Craig, you was around in the 80s doing your bit as a professional entertainer. Tell us what you thought about Prodigs, what they are, and what's your opinion of them.
Yeah, I was the 90s. I was more the mid 90s. I loved it. I loved staying in pro digs. So the first time I ever did it, I would have been 22, maybe. I was still just a kid. I was relatively new to the business, and I was working for McLeod Holden, and Liz started sending me off in all sorts of different places. The first ones were up in the northeast, which I guess was probably the most popular area. And generally, what you did back in those days, you had the 10-day runs, where you'd be signed a short-term contract for work for 10 nights for a flat fee. And again, I think back in those days, my flat fee was probably about 700 quid for 10 shows, which doesn't sound a lot. And it wasn't a massive amount of money, but what it was a guaranteed income. Because you weren't earning a lot of money, you couldn't afford to stay in nice hotels. And it was too far to keep driving backwards and forwards every day because it would have cost a fortune in petrol. So you stayed in pro digs. And there were several up in the northeast. The one that I used to use the most, again, was one of the most famous, was the Farm, which was just outside Spennymoor, which was literally set up just as a pro digs for entertainers.
Can you explain about the Farm? Because I've stayed there as well. Can you just explain to the viewers what it was and why it was there and type of people that stayed there?
It was literally a working farm. So you had Rita, who was the wife, and the husband was it Mick, who was her husband? I think it was Mick. It's going back 30 years now, trying to remember. But they had a working farm, and they had a massive farmhouse. And they basically split it into two. So half of the farmhouse was set up as digs, using a bunch of the bedrooms. I forget exactly how many bedrooms it had, but it had a lot. And then the other half of the farmhouse was where they lived, and they ran the farm from that side. And for us, for the working acts, there was a big lounge. I remember there were several sofas in there. It was a big space. There was at least 4 or 5 sofas in there with a TV, a big open fire. I remember having the coal fire. Then there was another separate room as well that had a pool table in, that we used to spend a lot of time during the days playing pool. And so, yeah, that was the basic setup of the farm. And it was all professional acts. So everything was timed, for example, for acts. So breakfast in the morning, normally if you stay at a B&B, breakfast is between maybe 7 and 9 in the morning. Breakfast there was at 11 o'clock in the morning, because everybody was getting in from gigs late on a night and then sitting up and chatting till 2 or 3 in the morning. So nobody was waking up before 10 in the morning.
But
so
Craig,
breakfast was at 11 in the morning.
It was a proper breakfast, wasn't it?
And it was full English. It was full English, pots of tea, bacon, eggs, you name it. You could ask for all the extras. It was jam and toast. And I clearly remember sitting in the kitchen. And again, it was a proper farmhouse kitchen with maybe 4 or 5 tables. And there were weekends when I was there, if you had some of the band staying, there could easily be 20 people sat in that kitchen.
Do you remember Do you remember the big Aga oven that they had as well?
Yes, of course. Yeah, that was where everything was cooked. Yeah, it was a proper farmhouse kitchen. Yeah, that's what it was.
Didn't they make you welcome?
Oh, every time you went back, Rita was like everybody's mum. She looked after, and especially, as I said, because I was only young when I first started going there. I was in my early 20s. I'd only been in the business for 2 or 3 or 4 years. So I was still kind of learning my trade, and I hadn't long been living away from home, to be honest. So Rita looked after everybody.
Yeah.
She was fantastic.
And it was really out of the way. It was I remember when I first went to it, Craig, you had to drive down all these country lanes. There was no GPSs then.
No.
You had a map. You were driving and looking at the map and thinking, right, is it that? If you were no good at map reading, you'd never found it. And I remember most acts coming, what a bugger to find this place. I always remember saying, but when you found it and you pulled down this little lane and it was just like really haunted with loads of trees and this big old house. The door was always open. There were dogs about and things like that. Like you say, it was a working farm. There was tractors and everything like that. But you could park your van or your gear, and you could leave your gear. You could leave your van open all night.
Yeah.
It was totally secure. Nobody would bother you or anything like that. And like you said, acts were getting back sometimes 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then they'd sit in the lounge and chit chat over, maybe bring a few beers back or pot of tea or something like that. Sometimes they'd make you a pot of tea and you'd go to bed 4 or 5 o'clock. Think, right, get up in the morning and have the breakfast, then maybe have another nap in the afternoon if you weren't doing an afternoon gig. And pro digs, to me was the ultimate enjoyment for staying away, because if, like Craig, if you stay in a hotel nowadays, it's so clinical and hygienic, and you don't know anybody, and your car's not safe. Yeah, there's cameras and things like that, and if somebody knew he was an entertainer and he was in the car park, they could see it. It's an open invitation. Whereas these gigs that we did, up in the northeast, and we stayed at Rita's farm, was purely professional actors, musicians, entertainers, and things like that. And I met some great people there, as I'm sure you did, Craig. Pro digs referred to temporary rented accommodation as well. Often spare rooms in people's homes reserved for professional entertainers on tour. There wasn't hotels, Craig, was there? But more like short-term lodgings arranged by, agents or theatres or word of mouth, something like that. So we've spoke about Rita's, and do you know what, Craig? I've searched the internet wide and long and high to try and find a picture of the farm, and I can't find it anywhere. So I don't know. I've looked under lodgings, I've looked under pro digs, I've looked under working farms. It's impossible. Maybe if somebody has an old picture somewhere, it'd be nice to send it through.
I'm not. I don't know if there would be pictures, because it was so long before
there
anybody had
cameras
photo.
them days.
No, nobody had cameras on their phones. I remember the payphone. I remember the payphone in the hallway at the farm. If you wanted to, if you wanted to call your wife or your girlfriend or whatever back home, then you had to use the payphone and drop your 10 pence in. And so maybe there are no photos, but I don't know. Somebody must have taken something, I suppose.
Do you know the other thing I liked, Craig? You spoke about 10 days over a 7-day, 10 gigs over a 7-day period. That means you'd do us 2 Sunday afternoons and maybe, and then you'd get a night off during the week. And that night off was maybe a Monday, Tuesday or a Wednesday. And most of the other acts were probably working, like the bands, and you used to go out with them. Did you ever go out with any of the bands?
Yeah, that was one of the things. If you did have a night off, very often, I remember, for example, staying at Gareth Thomas's place in South Wales. Gareth Thomas was an agent down here.
Yeah, let's move on to that, Craig. Let's move on to Wales now. We've spoke about Spennymoor. Let's move on to Gareth Thomas.
Yeah, Gareth Thomas had the place in Neath.
Yes.
So that was slightly different because he was an agent, but he ran a digs as well. It was actually his wife, if I remember right, it was his wife that took care of the digs, and then he ran the agency. And again, it was the South Wales at the time was very much like the Northeast. It was a great place to work. There were some fantastic clubs down there. You had the Heads of the Valley, which was the road that you had the motorway that went across the bottom of South Wales, and then partway up you had the Heads of the Valleys road, and then all these small roads coming off, which led to all of the small mining towns. And all of them had their old either working men's clubs. Most of them were miners' welfare, so these fantastic places. And when you stayed at Gareth Thomas's, one of the acts would always do the Sunday lunch.
Oh.
So if you weren't doing the Sunday lunch, and this was at the local miners' welfare, at the Neath miners' welfare, you used to do the Sunday lunch there, and then all the other acts would go in and watch. And the same thing, if you had a night off during the week, let's say you were off on the Monday, Tuesday, very often you would go and watch one of the other acts working in one of the other local clubs, taking notes or, learning stuff, or just going out just to go and, be social. There was a lot of that. A lot of that went on at the farm as well. I did that several times, going and watching other acts during the week just to see what they were doing. And again, as I said, because I was young at the time, I used to go and look at other acts to see what they were doing and try and, learn the good things to do.
I remember, Craig, especially in the Northeast, you'd get to the gig and it was nine times out of 10, it was upstairs. Old fire escape outside, full of ice or snow.
Yeah.
And you had no other way of getting in. You had to go up the fire escape. And if you was on your own, like you was and I was, at some point, you had to lock your car, get a piece of equipment out, carry it up the stairs, come back, unlock your car, get another piece, carry it up. And in them days, equipment was bloody heavy, wasn't it, Craig?
It was crazy. There are several of them that stick out.
Red House.
Stormont, Maine was one that really sticks out. For some reason, Stormont Maine Club was enormous, like an aircraft hangar inside. And that had a back fire escape where you had to carry all your gear up. And what I specifically remember about that was doing Sunday lunches there. And when you did your first set, the place was absolutely packed. I mean, rammed full. And you were talking, I don't know, you must have been 500, 600, 700 people. It was a big venue, but it was all men. Sunday lunch was just men. And there was a stripper and an act and bingo. And I remember going in the first act, and the place was packed, and doing my spot and thinking, this is great, and I've got a full house. And then speaking to the band in between the first and the second spot, and it said, Craig, don't take this personally, but when you go out for your second spot, there is going to be nobody in. As soon as the bingo's finished, they clear out. And I remember thinking at the time, yeah, there's going to be it's not going to be that empty. And literally, I walked out for my second set, and there's about 25 people left in the club. And literally an hour before, there are 500, 600, 700 men in there. As soon as the bingo finished, that was it. The place emptied. And then you've got to carry your gear all the way back down those stairs again. Leam Lane was another one as well. Leam Lane had the outside fire escape. If you had to do that in the winter or in the rain, climbing up a thin metal fire escape on the outside up to the top floor was absolute nightmare.
Driving rain and wind, and then you had to do your act. It was. Do you know that the clubs them days? Yeah, there was packed, Craig, and that's why there was called working men's clubs, because there was no ladies no ladies invited. It was purely a men's club. And the Sunday afternoons, you was on with a stripper, and they'd say, "Ladies and gents, special guest today is bingo."
Yeah. Normally the way.
Then we've got two delicious, lovely ladies. Linda Lovelace does Dallas and whatever. And then we've got Craig Leach.
Yeah. The way it was. That was Sundays. And that was all over. I did them. I can remember doing Featherstone. Hull had a couple.
Did.
Hull used to do Piper Club, had
Correct.
a stripper. Cherokee had a stripper on a Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah. And Craig, the newspapers was out on the front row. There was all reading the newspapers, crossed legs, fag in one hand, pant in the other. It was like...
Piper Club was the most strange one, because Piper Club down Newland Avenue in Hull, for those that don't know Piper Club, but it was right in the middle of the student area.
Yeah.
So on a Sunday lunch, you used to get this weird mix of all your normal kind of guys who would normally go in, who were going to sit there with a pint of mild and make it last for 3 hours, with a cig hanging out of the mouth. And then all of these 19-year-old students all sitting there with their newspapers on a Sunday lunch, sitting and occasionally looking up over the newspapers to see what you were doing on with your act, to see what the stripper was doing, and then go back down to the newspapers again. There was Sunday lunches with strippers was strange.
There was, and there was no holes barred, was there, with the strippers? Everything was off.
Yeah. It was...
Nowadays, it just wouldn't work, would it? It just doesn't.
No. It was quite an eye-opener, as I said, when you're 21, 22 years old and you're doing a Sunday lunch, and there's
but
as you're walking on, the stripper walks past you back into the dressing room.
That's what I'm saying. You're in the dressing room,
walking on stage.
and they come back in stark naked. I love.
Yeah. It was an eye-opener.
It was good. But the good thing about those times, and especially the pro digs, was the sense of community. Performers in the same town often stayed in the same digs or nearby. Yeah. And the landladies were really supportive, like you said, they cooked you the best breakfast, and, some of these landladies probably was ex-performers themselves. They wanted to make entertainers comfortable. And of course, the convenience was the most important thing, because it was located in a place where you'd kind of like be in the middle. So Gareth Thomas, for example, he was based in Neath. You'd go to Swansea, you'd go to Porthcawl, Cardiff. So you'd kind of like do all around that area. The agent knew where you were staying and knew whether it was too far to travel or not. But some of them, you still did travel sometimes a couple of hours, didn't you, Craig, to some of the venues?
Yeah, I mean, you could. So if you work in the northeast, you could travel as far as Berwick upon Tweed. So if you were staying in Spennymoor, getting up to Berwick, there were a couple of holiday camps up there, Eggleston Castle.
Yes,
I remember doing that a few times. So yeah, that was still quite. It was still a good probably an hour and a half to get up there from the digs. Yeah, and again from the heads of the valleys. If you were doing some of the ones off the heads of the valleys, they were quite a long drive still.
You did one you stayed at one in, is it Birmingham, Craig?
I did, yeah. So that was slightly different. That was more set up for actors. So I think it was more that was if I remember right. Again, this is a long time ago. If I remember rightly, that was actors who were working for like the BBC in Birmingham. They would go and stay there.
Okay.
But equally just as nice, one thing I remember is they had a massive video collection. I remember saying, look, when you come back from your gigs, if you want, just, pull out one of the videos and stick the video, obviously before DVDs even, stick the videos in the video and you can watch a film. It was that type of thing. But it was exactly the same in terms of the friendliness and of the actual, the owners, the landlady and the husband. I forget their names. It's too many years ago. But again, that was, like you said, it was right in the middle of all of the different clubs that they had down in Birmingham at that time. So you would work Birmingham and maybe Wolverhampton and trying to think of Coventry. you covered all of that area when you stayed down there. Did that? I did.
Didn't you have a story about one of the digs? You said you told me a story once about one of the digs. Something happened. I can't remember, Craig.
Oh, I think no. I
Yeah.
think it was was it the farm?
All
Well, there's
right.
a few. There's a whole bunch of them. I remember I was there the weekend that Rita's son nearly got himself killed.
That's the one.
He
I
was
think.
in
Yeah.
a yeah.
Yeah.
They had two sons. One was Brett.
Yes.
And I can't remember which one it was, but one of them, the younger one, he had himself like a sports car. And he used to go driving around those country lanes like he was Lewis Hamilton, like a nutcase. And I remember it was one weekend. And yeah, he'd been involved in an accident. He'd been driving around and apparently he'd smashed into a combine harvester or something. And it had literally taken the top of his car off and nearly taken the top of his head off. So we came in and there's bandages and all sorts and cuts and bits of all sorts of stuff on his head. No, staying at the farm, there was yeah, a lot of different. I remember one time, one of the best, talking about the kind of the whole community feel that you used to get. One time there was a power cut, so we'd all got back from our gigs, and we'd all start coming in from your gigs anywhere between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning. Most people are coming back in, get back in, and there's no power, but the fire's roaring, and everybody starts to sit down. And that particular weekend, there were quite a few comedians in, and there were 2 or 3 in from Liverpool. But one of them was a duo. I think it was, is it Penny Black or something like that, but there was a comedy duo anyway. There were 3 or 4. So basically, what they started doing, we all cracked open a few cans or whatever. They sat there with candlelight and just the light of the fire, and they started doing their acts, and they were bouncing off each other. One would crack a gag, and then another one would go, "Oh, well, have you heard this one?" And then the other one would go, "Well, have you heard this one?" And I sat there again, just some young kid, for about 2 hours, and watching these comedians bouncing back and forwards, telling their gags while we were sat there till, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right, yeah.
It was that type, and there were maybe another 10 people in the digs at the time, just laughing at these comedians, just kind of riffing, basically.
I'm a bit older than you, Craig, so I probably wasn't there when you was there. I was probably there more in the 80s, and it was rife with some of the big bands like Magic, who was a Queen tribute band at the time.
Yeah.
I've been out with them a few times, and Rita used to idolize them,
Yeah.
because I think they took her out on a gig once, and she just couldn't believe the talent they had. Like she said, it was like watching Queen.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We spoke about the good, but there's also the bad and the hilarious. There were strict rules. No guests was allowed. You weren't allowed to bring a woman back, was you?
No, none of that.
Curfews, no cooking or using certain parts of the house.
Yeah.
Clashes of lifestyles. Landladies sometimes didn't understand performers' late hours. Cold rooms, Rita.
Yeah, cold. Yeah, and
Central heating. Oh, the beds was bowered.
The beds were like hammocks. They were like hammocks. Yeah, like you said, they were shaped like that. My God.
But comfortable. Want the comfortable.
They were. That was the bizarre thing. They were comfortable. They must. I don't know how many decades old they were. There was no springs left on them, but they were. They were still comfortable. And I remember the other thing I remember, there were no quilts, so it was all the old-fashioned sheets. So literally, you were pinned to the bed because during the winter, like you said, there was no central heating, so the rooms would be cold. So you'd have like 4 blankets on the bed, and you could barely move under your blankets because it was so heavy.
I didn't want to be the first out of bed because the first out of bed always lit the fire.
I had to light the fire in the morning. Yeah.
So you'd be in the hearth, with all the paper and the wood, trying to light the fire and stoking it and putting the coal on. But when you come back late, it was lovely and warm because the fire was always it was fantastic. And I remember them days, Craig, where you used to, I don't know about you, but I always used to like a Chinese when I finished my gig.
Yeah.
Go to a Chinese, but there was smaller portions, but still a lot. And you used to get back and you say, "Oh, I can't go to bed. Yeah, I'm still full."
Yeah. There was obviously the kitchen was out of bounds.
Yes.
So we'd lock the door to the kitchen. So you had your meal times, you had your breakfast and your evening meal at the farm as well. We too would do evening meal as well. But the kitchen was locked, so you couldn't get in. So you had to get yourself a takeaway or something on the way home if you were hungry.
Sadly, Craig, it died out. I think it probably died out latter part of the 90s. Did pro digs, and I think it started. Where do acts stay nowadays? Do you know?
I guess most acts would drive back home. There is if you're only doing one-off gigs in different areas and traveling around, there is no point unless you are traveling a long, long way. I did the Warner Hotel circuit for quite a few years. There, I would try and stay over. If you're working on the Isle of Wight or working down at Cricket St Thomas, for example, in Somerset, that was a 4 or 5 hour drive home. There was no way I was doing that because that's just dangerous, driving at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Then I would stay over. But I guess most people now, they would drive home whenever they can. I think the death of it came when they struggled with the 10-day runs, because that was why people very often stayed in those digs. Certainly for individual acts, it was slightly different for bands, but for individual acts or duos, you would do those 10-day runs. But when the club started cutting back on the midweek acts, there just wasn't enough work. So I remember it started as 10-day runs, but then I think I did a couple towards the end that were actually 12-day runs, and you were guaranteed 10 nights work out of 12 because the agent couldn't guarantee to get you working every single night. And I think that's what killed it in the end, that those Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday gigs just started disappearing because the clubs couldn't afford to have acts during the week.
Can you remember, Craig, how much it was to stay at Spennymoor?
You know, I can't
remember.
It wasn't a lot. It wasn't a lot. No, I honestly can't.
No, I can't.
If it was a tenner a day or something like that, it wasn't much more than that.
I don't think it was that. If any of the acts can remember the prices, please leave us a message on the video, because I'm sure me and Craig would love to know, costs and things like that. And if you stayed at the farm or Gareth Thomas's place, let us know, because it brings back all these memories for artists. It's absolutely fantastic. Did you ever do Scotland 10-day runs, Craig?
I did a couple of there. The most memorable one for me was during Euro 96. I was up there when the football was held in England, and there I didn't stay in pro digs because I'm not sure why, actually. Maybe there weren't so many pro digs up there, but I stayed above a pub. So it was a pub on the outskirts of Edinburgh that I stayed at. I remember because it was very close to the river, would it be the Clyde? Is it the Clyde? What's the one, the big one where the Forth Bridge is? Probably. It wasn't too far from there. Clyde, and I stayed there, and it was during the tournament, and I can remember the night of the semi-final when England played Germany in the semi-final, the famous one where Gaza misses, it went to extra time and we lose on penalties. I was working in Edinburgh, and Alan Shearer scored after about 2 minutes, and I'm going crazy. I'm jumping around, and I realise I'm looking around, and every single person in the room was Scottish, and they're all looking at me, and nobody else was cheering. I was like, okay, I better keep my mouth shut here. And then we got beat, and I had to go on and do my act straight after, obviously. After watching England lose in the semi-final, I was so depressed, and then I had to go and sing afterwards. A
lot of people who are not English, Craig, don't understand that Scotland is not England. They still think Scotland and Wales is part of England, but the United Kingdom is made up of different segments. So you've got Scotland, which is Scottish, it's not English. Yeah. You've got Wales, which is Welsh, it's not English. And then you've got part of Ireland, Northern Ireland, which is English, but the Southern Ireland is not.
Yeah. And then you've got the People's Republic of Yorkshire as well.
Yorkshire was the height of Clubland, I think. If you lived in Leeds, West Yorkshire was, you was working 7 nights a week, sometimes 10 nights a week, because there was that much work around. Now it's sadly all disappeared. I do kind of like empathise a bit for entertainers nowadays, because it's changed dramatically, and I went back a last year or so to do a few gigs, and it was dramatically different, Craig. There's more pubs than there is clubs. Some of the clubs that are still going, you got your Walton Club in Hull that's still very big and still, similar, but it's still not the same. It's not the same. There's no smoking in pubs and clubs anywhere. When we was there, you couldn't see the audience in some of the places.
No. Yeah, that was, yeah. Yeah. Excuse me. When I used to come home from gigs, I would literally take my gear out of the back of the car. I would lock my car in the garage with all of my gear in the back of the car, but I would take out my clothes, take them out, and just hang them in the garage just to air them. I couldn't bring them in the house because it would stink the house out. They smelled so badly of smoke that used to leave them in the garage overnight to try and air them a bit.
But you know what the funny thing was, Craig? No smoke machines allowed.
No, I know. That was the irony. No, I know. Yeah, that was the days, I guess. One of the things that I think acts miss out maybe on now is that, I spoke about it a little bit earlier, is the learning experience that I got from staying in digs and speaking with other experienced acts. I remember one time when I was quite young that I was having trouble setting up my PA system. I didn't really know a lot about it, and I was having trouble getting a good sound. And there was one of the acts said to me, well, tell you what, why don't you bring your system into the house? So I literally took it into the farm, set up my gear, and him and another guy helped me to get the sound correct from my gear, which was a massive help as a 23-year-old kid who didn't really know what I was doing with it.
Camaraderie between acts was second to none, Craig?
There was a lot of sharing went on. There was a lot
Yeah,
of rivalry as well. There was
yeah,
certainly rivalry between acts. Acts trying to outdo other acts and making out that they were superstars. And the reality is, none of us were superstars. We were all doing the same jobs, trying to entertain. Some better than others, yeah. But if there was ever anybody who got a bit too big-headed, very often they were kind of, other acts were aware of it and were kind of always took anything they said with a pinch of salt. But no, the camaraderie and the helpfulness. My dots, for example, originally I used to get my dots from Julie Kinsey in Hull, and then somebody in the digs introduced me to John Black, who was the keyboard player at the A1 club in Gateshead at the time, but he also did dots. And I just started working on the cruises, and I needed 7-piece arrangements, and to get 7-piece arrangements wasn't particularly easy, and it wasn't cheap. And this guy in the dig said to me, "Well, why don't you come with me?" I'm going up to see John. I'm going to pick up a few. Why don't you come and I'll introduce you? And that was what he did. I jumped in his car and drove up there to Chesterley Street and introduced me to John. And for the next 10 years, John's were the only dots I ever used. And that came off the back of just having a conversation sat in the farm.
yeah. For the viewers, dots was written manuscripts music, which is, in them days, you needed dots to work because most pubs and clubs and venues had their own backing, so the keyboard player and a drummer usually. And if you were lucky in the Northeast, they had great bands, and they'd say, "Have you got your dots?" And I'd say, "Well, I've got the keyboard parts, but I ain't got the drum parts." Some of the drummers say, "I don't read dots." So the dots was kind of like professionally written manuscript music paper where a keyboard player or a drummer or a musician could read the music from. And they was absolutely brilliant, so.
Yeah, the Northeast had some amazing bands back in the King, and a lot of them still, even back in the mid-90s, still had 4-piece. King Street Social had an amazing 4-piece. I remember that one clearly.
Do you know, Craig, some of them would back your harmonies. You think, wow.
Yeah. Leam Lane. Yeah, the guys at Leam Lane, you'd be singing a song and suddenly, they'd jump in behind you, and you're getting full 3-piece harmony as well. If you're working in bands, you get that, but when you're singing on your own, you're not used to having somebody harmonizing with it. It was great.
Yeah, you're not. So I just want to remind the viewers, we've been talking about pro digs, which at that time pro digs refers to short-term accommodation by professional entertainers, and I'm sure there's lots of entertainers out there who will watch this and can that will bring back a few memories. The golden era of pro digs, I think that's what me and Craig would call it. Community driven, affordable and flexible. Word of mouth, everybody'd say, "Reaters, I'm going to Northeast, Reaters," So it was, where have they gone? Now, I think, Craig, a lot of them, I asked you this earlier, the rise of Airbnb and short-term rentals, I think that now as coming. I was talking to a band on here a couple of months ago. They said they use Airbnb and they get a good deal. Now, digital booking platforms as well. There's theatre digital bookers and things like that. And, some of them are still holding on. I'd like to know where. So if you're still, entering or going to pro digs, it'd be great to tell me and Craig where you are, where you've been. Because it was absolutely awesome. So for those people that the newer people, that are in this business and didn't understand what pro digs was, I hope myself and Craig have given you a good insight to what it was and what it was like. And I wish people could experience it, because it was living. I consider myself to be fortunate enough. Yeah, I'm older now. I'm nearly 66, but I've done all the Clubland, as has Craig has, stayed in most of the pro digs, and had the time of my life, and it really brought you out your shell. If you was a shy kind of kid, like you was at first, Craig, it brings you out your shell and you become more, what's the word? Dominant.
More confident, I guess. Yeah, more confident, especially as I said, when you're younger and you're surrounded by a lot of experienced artists, people who've been in the in the game, been in the game. That's just suddenly, again, it sprung another memory of staying there. There was a guy called, was he Spencer something, and I saw him work once again on a night off. I went with him.
Not Spencer Gibbons, is it?
I can't remember. Spencer's in my head for some reason. I'm saying he was an older guy. It's probably about my age now. It's probably about our age now, in his 50s, mid-50s or something like that. And at the time, I was only a young kid. And You know, there was all these things about having the best equipment, and that was one of the things you did used to get. People were always bragging about the
Yeah.
equipment they've got. I've got the best system, and I've got the best, especially the bands. The bands like to brag, and the duos like to brag that they've got the best systems and the best lights and everything. And for us solo singers, it wasn't quite so much. And I remember I went with him, and he went with 2 speakers that didn't match. It was like one was a Carlsberg and one was a Peavey or something. And he had this little tiny Carlsberg power amp that was no more than about 150 watts. And he had his cables and his microphone in a plastic carrier bag from some supermarket. His dots in another plastic bag, and he threw them in the back of the car and we went to the show. And what an entertainer. He was
Yeah.
brilliant. And I remember
Humbug.
thinking afterwards, you know, we spend all of this money on all of this equipment. And at the end of the day, he was getting paid exactly the same as all the rest of us.
Correct.
Yeah, we would spend thousands on all of this gear, and there he goes with his plastic bag and his microphone and his leads and stuff. It was little things like that that stuck in my head, things that I learned from that. Do you know what? I don't really need that new set of speakers. I don't really need that new microphone. What I've got is working perfectly well.
Correct. Yeah. Because in all fairness, Craig, the audience don't know. If you're singing through a PV or a FBT or a QSC or whatever, the audience don't know. They don't care. It's just you think, that sounds good. But to them,
Yeah.
if you're a good singer, who gives a damn? You know, you
No,
still
no, no,
sound
no.
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So spend the money. Well, I'd like to say a big thanks to Craig because we go back a long way. We worked for the same agent as well, and we've had some great times together. And I think there's nobody better to discuss this than Craig himself on this occasion. And like I say to you, if you've watched this and there's opportunity for you to get in touch with me and Craig on the YouTube video. That this is about probably, I don't know, 145th episode, 245th episode. It's always great to chat. It's always great to bring back memories. And I've had some great feedback on some of the videos that's been done. Craig was kind enough when I very first started doing the showcase. He was one of the first entertainers on here. And I learned a lot from that. So now the show's developed. So thank you very much, Craig. Always been a great
Thanks, Shaun.
supporter. And thank you, everybody, for watching the showcase and keeping up the spirit and promoting it. Remember to watch, share and like, because we make these videos for your entertainment. They're not just for ourselves. Craig gives up his time. I put a lot of time into this, and we just hope you enjoy them. That's all it's about. So thank you very much. From the showcase, goodbye.